Viewers are invited to drop their city, state, or even the exact time on their clocks right now down in the comments. Because this one, well, it's worth knowing where you were when you heard it. And then he's already in that courtroom, the air smelling faintly of old varnish and burnt coffee, watching Linda Matthews stand there in her deep green blazer like she's waiting for a trophy. The judge adjusts his glasses, flips a stack of papers thick enough to stop a bullet, and says in a voice that carries all the way to the back, "Mrs. Matthews, you built your private cabin on land you do not own." There's this audible gasp. Someone even drops a pen, and he catches her smile flicker, just barely. She starts to speak, but the judge raises his palm, that little silent hammer of authority, and turns to him. "Mr. Carter, as the rightful owner, all improvements now belong to you. The cabin, the fixtures, everything." It's the sentence he's been waiting on for what feels like years, but the reality hits like a sucker punch. Legs a little shaky, breath caught halfway up his chest. Linda whirls toward him, eyes narrowing into a threat. "This isn't over, Tom." And he just looks at her, wondering if she even understands yet that the arrogance she wears like perfume won't save her here. Thing is, the way they got to that point wasn't something you could sum up in a courtroom transcript. Because when he first came to Pine Creek Estates 3 years back, fresh off selling his dad's old Denver workshop, he wasn't looking for a fight. 6 acres of pines, a ribbon of creek cutting through the middle, and nights where the loudest thing was the water on the rocks. That's what he bought. The HOA welcome wagon rolled up on day 2. Linda, homemade pie in one hand and a welcome packet in the other so thick it could stop a door. "Just so we keep Pine Creek beautiful," she'd said with a smile that was 90% teeth, 10% warning. Historians still argue whether certain small-town smiles are born from genuine warmth or the thrill of low-level tyranny. At first, he chalked her quirks up to the detail-obsessed personality type. Mailbox height, shed roof shade, even where his canoe could sit. His dad's advice was don't start fights with neighbors, so he played along, fixed the mailbox, painted the shed. But then, on a Saturday that was supposed to be nothing more than grilled burgers with his neighbor Jack, he heard the real lore. Jack, 20 years deep in Pine Creek politics, leaned in and said, "She's been HOA president 8 years. You stand up to her, she'll make your life miserable." He figured he could keep his head down, until one morning the sound of chainsaws carried up from the creek. At first, he thought it was a neighbor clearing deadfall, but the noise didn't stop. Days later he walked down and found workers cutting on his side, claiming orders from Mrs. Matthews. That was the first time she told him the land was debatable, and the first time the hairs on the back of his neck went up. A few months later, lumber and concrete started arriving, and what she called a little cabin was rising right where his deer trails used to be. It's hard to pinpoint the exact moment patience stops being a virtue and starts being surrender, but standing there with sawdust in the air and her smirk in his face, he knew he'd just found it. From that moment on, the creek stopped being just a pleasant ribbon of water. It was the front line. He went down there one gray morning, phone in hand, and the little cabin had grown overnight into a skeleton with walls, a half-finished roof, and workers moving with the quick, practiced rhythm of people on a deadline. When he told them it was his land, they just traded glances and kept hammering. That told him everything. They were either too scared of Linda or being paid enough to ignore a property deed. So he documented it, every angle, every truck, every board of cedar, because sometimes you fight with nails and sometimes you fight with pixels. She showed up in a beige pantsuit like she was about to pitch a hedge fund, sunglasses barely holding back the smug. "Let me explain something," she said, voice like a principal scolding a kid. "There's a discrepancy in the boundary lines. I have documentation that says part of this is HOA property." Historians still argue whether her wink that day was meant to signal confidence or just a reflex from years of unchecked authority. Either way, it landed like a dare. That night over steak, Jack confirmed what he feared. If she could push a boundary adjustment through the county before he fought back, she could claim the land outright. That was the moment the chess game began. He dug out his father's old files, survey maps clear as daylight showing the creek fully on his side. Then came the trip to the county clerk's office, where Denise with the chain-link reading glasses typed, clicked, and frowned. "There's a pending request for a boundary adjustment, filed by the HOA, represented by Linda Matthews." When he got home, A violation notice about his fence height was taped to the door. He crumpled it before the ink could even fade in the sunlight. Still, he tried a last-ditch civil route, a cafe meeting over coffee. She floated, sharing the property like it was a benevolent gift, even suggesting a plaque with his father's name. He nearly choked on his black coffee. The next day, she planted an HOA property sign smack in the middle of his land. That's when he called Mark, his old high school buddy turned real estate lawyer. Mark was blunt. "She's counting on you freezing until it's too late." They filed a cease and desist and challenged her adjustment request, but Linda's moves only got bolder. One night, headlights crept up behind him near the creek, her SUV. She told him flat out, "You'll see soon enough it's not yours." A few nights later, he caught her with a stocky man, hammering a fresh metal stake with orange ribbon into the ground, the official boundary for an inspector. He stepped out of the dark with his phone recording, the red light blinking like a warning buoy. She froze for half a beat, then tried to bluff it off, but the footage was his checkmate in waiting. Mark called it gold and moved for an injunction to halt construction. For a heartbeat, the clearing went quiet. No hammers, no saws, just the wind. But quiet in a fight like this is never peace. It's the pause between plays. And when her next move came, it was loud, public, and aimed right at the heart of the neighborhood's perception of who was right. It started with the banner, strung up between two posts by the creek, reading, "Coming soon. Pine Creek Community Cabin, an HOA project for all residents." The drawing looked like it belonged on a postcard, but to him it might as well have been a wanted poster with his name under it. A few days later, Linda knocked on his door with that syrupy voice offering an olive branch. Join the committee, get a plaque in his father's honor. He shut the door before she could finish. Then came the grand opening stunt. Cars lined the road, music floated up from the cabin, and paper plates piled high with potluck casserole were being passed around. She stood on the porch with a microphone, calling it the future of Pine Creek. He cut her off mid-sentence, telling everyone they were trespassing on his land. Gasps, whispers, and then blue lights. Two officers walked up, saying they had a complaint about him, causing a disturbance. Historians still argue whether that smile she gave at that moment was victory or bait, but either way it worked. The officers kept him at bay, but Mark was in the crowd, quietly taking photos, each click another nail in the legal coffin she was building for herself. The injunction hearing became its own high-stakes spectacle. Mark laying out the deed, the survey, the video of her planting stakes in the night. Her lawyer spun a tale about historical mapping errors and community benefit, but the judge saw through enough to freeze all activity on the land until ownership was settled. It was a win, briefly, because before the ink dried, Jack sent a photo of her unloading furniture into the cabin. That was contempt of court, clear as daylight. Mark marched the evidence to the sheriff, and Harris himself handed her a summons. She responded with a counterclaim accusing him of harassment, lining up HOA witnesses to paint him as the neighborhood's villain. When Denise at the county clerk's office confirmed her first boundary adjustment had been denied, she also warned about a new application with different coordinates. Linda wasn't retreating, she was flanking. At the next hearing, her witnesses folded under cross-examination, timelines crumbling, details vanishing. Mark presented the county's statement. The land was his, full stop. The judge not only upheld the injunction, but ordered her to remove everything within 14 days. To most people, that's game over. To Linda Matthews, it was just another square on the board. She called an emergency HOA meeting about defending community spaces, then spent the days painting the porch, planting flowers, and making the cabin prettier, defiance dressed as curb appeal. When the 14 days ended, deputies arrived with an enforcement order. Linda walked out in pearls, face set like marble, and was given 48 hours to clear out. And then, finally, the cabin emptied, rocking chair gone, curtains gone, even the mailbox ripped out. But standing there in the hush with the pines whispering overhead, he knew better than to call it finished. People like Linda don't stop. They circle back, looking for cracks. And if she came again, he'd be ready, with every photo, every page, every second of truth in his corner. The wind down begins here. His voice softens, sentences stretching like the slow pull of the creek at dusk. He says there's a kind of quiet that follows a battle like this, one that isn't exactly peace, but it lets you breathe again. You walk the land at sunset and hear the crunch of pine needles under your boots, see the gold light sliding through branches, and for a moment you can almost believe the fight is over. The cabin stands hollow now, just wood and nails, stripped of the story she tried to force on it. He lingers at the water's edge, remembering his father's steady hands measuring boards in that Denver workshop, the way he said, "Don't let anyone take what you've built." The air smells of sap and cool earth, the creek carrying away the last echoes of chainsaws and arguments. And as the evening deepens, his voice drops to a whisper, promising, not to the camera, not even to the neighbors, but to himself, that this land will still be his tomorrow, and the day after, and the day after that. The rest can wait. Tonight, the pines can stand guard.